In this lesson, we will learn to use Spring Security's User Details Context Mapper. This object is used to map data from our LDAP to and from our user objects within our applications. Currently, when we use LDAP authentication, the only thing that gets stored within our security context is our user details object, where we can only access the username, which would map to the UID, and the password, as well as the granted authorities. We're going to map our LDAP data to a custom user class, like our auto user class, within our application. We're going to navigate to our Apache Directory Studio, and we're going to make some changes to our LDAP. So if you start your server and then navigate to the OU people entry, go to our first user, which is Jane Doe. We're going to add a few attributes here. Just right click on one of these blank lines and hit new attribute. Then we just type out the name of the attribute. And the first one we want is the given name. That is very similar to the first name. So we're just going to put in Jane, and then we're going to add another attribute, which is going to be the mail, and that's where we will store email. So once we've selected mail, just hit finish, and then we'll make up an email for Jane Doe. Once you have entered these two attributes, just select them and then hit copy values. And then you can navigate down to Joe Doe, and you can then paste these values in, and we'll just switch them up for Joe and add this extra data into our LDAP. We'll do the same for Junior. So we'll just switch the email, and we'll switch that first name to Junior. And then we'll navigate down to the K Bowersox user, and we'll paste these values in. We'll switch up the first name to Kevin, and then we'll put in an email address for this user. So at this point, we've added these two additional attributes to each one of our entries that correspond with an inet org person user within our LDAP. So we just have some more additional information about the folks in our LDAP. We need to navigate to our auto user class, and now we need to implement Spring Security's user details interface. And we'll import it. And then Spring Security is going to give us a warning that we haven't implemented every method. So we'll add all the unimplemented methods. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new field, and it's going to be a private field of type collection. We are going to use a wildcard here for our generic type that extends granted authority. And we're just going to call this collection authorities. So we'll put that in place, and that's going to store all of the user's granted authorities that will be returned by the LDAP. Now, we're not going to store this anywhere in our database, so we're just going to mark this as transient with our JPA annotations. So we'll save that. And now we're going to navigate down to some of these methods that were added for our user details interface that we must implement. And you remember the majority of these. What we're going to do this time is we're going to add a setter method for the authorities. So you can just hit Shift-Alt-S and then R, and that will pull up the Generate Getters and Setters dialog, and just click on Authorities and make sure the Set method is checked. Hit OK, and now we have our Set Authorities method. If you're familiar with using Eclipse, you've used these shortcuts a million times. Now we're going to return our authorities collection from our getAuthorities method. And then for all of these methods that return a Boolean, we're just going to make them return true. That way we don't have any problems accessing our user. If you don't have these in your data source for your users, it is quite all right just to set them to true. So at this point, we have completed the configuration of our auto user class, and we have added those additional attributes into our LDAP. Now we need to put the objects in place that are going to map that data to our auto user object. So let's go ahead and add a new class which we will use as our user details context mapper. So I'm just going to go within the source main Java source folder, and right under com.o'reilly.security, I'm just going to create a new class using the new dialog, so Control N, and then type class. Now we're going to create a class named custom user details context mapper. And this class is going to implement the user details context mapper interface. So just hit finish once you have selected that interface. And here we see our class, and this is what we're going to work on to provide the implementation of these two particular methods. The first method maps the data from the LDAP to our user details object, and that is the map user from context method. And then the second method maps our user data to the LDAP. We're going to look to implement these two methods, and they're going to allow us to convert LDAP data to and from our auto user object.